Tonight's Yom Hashoah, which is the yearly remembrance of the Holocaust and the 6 million Jewish lives lost during the Holocaust. It's been a little while since I published one of my mom's stories, and I started recording this initially back at the end of March. I haven't published it because of some concerns about how I'm trying to express my ideas related to anti Semitism, which is the topic covered in MomMom's discussion tonight. She's asked, did she experience anti Semitism? She says, I think maybe it's not right, and I know there was anti Semitism, but my whole life I didn't experience anti Semitism, even after being through the war. I'm going to play that now and come back after the episode to discuss.
Did you experience any anti-Semitism?
No. Surprisingly, we had once a week religion in our school, and the children were divided into three groups: the Catholic children, the Ukrainian, and the Jewish children. And we had a religious teacher.
Who taught
us.
Who taught your class religion?
He was not a rabbi, but he was a teacher of religion. I don't know what kind of title. We didn't call him by his name. And I thought that was quite progressive in Poland. It was quite democratic to have that. I did not encounter much anti-Semitism. I knew that it existed. I knew that when the holidays came around Christmas, the students used to come from Lvov, which was a university city, and
how far was
beat
that?
up the Jews, and they used to turn over the barrels of people who were selling fish. They used to spill the water, and they two more what? I know that the Jews used to be afraid during the holidays to go outside. They could cut the beard of a Jew. If he had a long beard, they could beat him up. So most of the time during Christmas time, we used to stay away from walking the streets. Once it was over, the life came back to normal.
You were saying at the end of the last tape that around Christmas time, the students from the city of Lvov would come in and disrupt Jewish lives.
Yes, the Jews were sort of in hiding. And after the holidays, the winter break, the students went back to the universities, and life went on. I did not encounter much of anti-Semitism. My parents had non-Jewish clientele, and they were very fond of my grandfather and of my father. Some were professional people, some were merchants. They trusted my grandfather very much. They wanted always his approval, because in Europe you buy material for suits and you have them made by a tailor, where if my grandfather said that this piece of goods is good, they trusted him. And I think that maybe it isn't right for me to say I know that was anti-Semitism. I did not encounter any problems through my lifetime.
I want to talk about Mom for a second, and an aspect of her personality that was oftentimes frustrating to my mom, and I think my aunts as well. Mom was never afraid to say whatever she was thinking. And I mentioned before this video that I've been started recording back in March and really hadn't published it. And part of that is because I'm nervous to express what I'm thinking related to anti-Semitism and what my mom's saying. My mom says she didn't experience anti-Semitism her whole life. That's a perspective. She obviously lived through the war. She obviously experienced that. Now, the question was from before the war, but you can see at the very end, she says, my whole life I never experienced anti-Semitism. I knew it existed. That's the topic that I think is very interesting. There's a couple of things that are really important here. When we start talking about speech and hate speech and fear, one of the things that I think is very important is the freedom of speech, which means, and the reason I think it's important is because I want the ability to be able to publish MomMom's story. I want the ability to be able to speak about MomMom's story. And so freedom of speech is very directly related to this topic to me, because by believing in freedom of speech, that means people have the right to say things that offend me, just as I may say things that offend them. And so, again, I think it's a topic that I think is very relevant here. And I want to talk about anti-Semitism and what I see in how MomMom talks about anti-Semitism. It exists. There's no question that it exists. We know of acts where it occurs. Things like what Kanye West says, obviously anti-Semitic. Actual acts of anti-Semitism, like what happened in Pittsburgh a few years ago, going into a temple and actually shooting people. These are acts of physical acts of anti-Semitism, real anti-Semitism. There are also acts that occur that have anti-Semitic connotations that are not necessarily anti-Semitism. An example of this that I want to give, and I'm not saying it's is or isn't anti-Semitism, but an example I want to give is at my children's high school, I can't remember, it was sometime in the last couple of years, there was vandalism done to the bathrooms. And when the vandalism was done to the bathrooms, there were some swastikas written on the walls. I don't know whether that's a direct act of anti-Semitism. I know that's kids doing something, causing vandalism and graffitiing on the walls. Do they even fully understand what they're writing? Probably. Do they understand that it's offensive? Probably. Is it done because they're looking to directly offend Jewish people or have a problem with the Jewish people? I don't know the answer to that. What I know is it's an opportunity to go in and educate in something like in that scenario and talk about things like what happened in the Holocaust and making sure that people understand it and understand that it did happen. Not only did it happened to my grandparent. My great-grandparents didn't, live through it. My grandmother's sister didn't live through it. Because people did act on anti-Semitic feelings or a hatred of a people. And that's something that we never want to happen. So again, the reason I struggle with this is because while we don't want those things to happen and we want to help educate people, we also don't want to stop. I don't want to stop freedom of speech, because if I can stop somebody from saying, hey, I don't like you because you're a Jewish person, then they can stop me from saying, hey, when people like you say something like that, it contributes to things like what happened in World War II and the Shoah. So again, this is April 17th this year is Yom HaShoah. Starts at sundown tonight. And I'm going to show you a candle that we received from the temple. For some reason, I'm having a hard time. There we go. And it's got the remembrance with the star. And, I'll be lighting that in a little bit in remembrance of the 6 million Jews. There's a little blessing that I'll say with it that I'm going to read. We light this yellow candle to rekindle God's flame, to shine his light upon the world once again, to sanctify the memories of the millions of souls, to honor their prayers and all of their goals. We bless their existence by being alive to light this yellow candle as proof we survived. May their memory be a blessing for all of us. And I light that with the remembrance of my great-grandparents and my great-aunt and all of those who didn't survive, and in honor of my grandmother, who has since passed, who did. And I'm happy that I get to be part of her legacy and part of those who lived on and grew.
I hope you're enjoying listening to and learning about MomMom's story. If you are, like, subscribe, and please share.